Do I really need to respond? This is actually a question I've been asking myself recently. You know what? When something happens to us, upsets us, or frustrates us, or make us feel misunderstood, there can be an immediate urge to respond, to explain ourselves, or to defend ourselves, or even to correct someone, just to do something. But what would happen before responding? We simply just pause and ask ourselves, is a response actually necessary? And if it is, what response would create less suffering here? Welcome to my next podcast episode, Pilgrim of the Path podcasts, Reflections for a Soulful Life. My name is Thomas and I do sound therapy. And this is just a space where I share some reflections from my own practice, from my own journey, my own life, and questions that might help us just live with greater awareness and compassion and intention, loving kindness. So, my first question to you is, how are you doing? Um, I think this has been a very challenging time for many of us. But something that I've been reflecting on this week, um, and actually not just this week, but for a very long time now, is how easily we actually just react when things become difficult out of habit. You know, we feel hurt, we're frustrated, overwhelmed, um, uncertain, and sometimes before we have really understood what is happening within us, we actually responded already, or we reacted. Um, so react is also a good word. So, but so in that moment, we say the words, we send the message, we make the decision, and we react in a way that later, when we reflect upon how we've reacted, we wish that we could have handled it differently. So I've been exploring compassion so much more deeply in my own practice over the last few weeks, and also shared that in my membership. And the one thing that has become so much clearer to me is that compassion begins with absolute openness and awareness. And we need to notice what is happening before, or recognize what is happening before we choose how we respond. And this is where I found the two questions quite helpful. First of all, you recognize the emotion or feeling that comes up, and then you ask that question of, is a response necessary, right? First question. And if it is, what response would create less suffering um, for both parties if both parties are involved? Because now the first question gives us like permission not to react immediately, but also creating that space of recognition of that emotion that came up. Because I mean, not every comment needs an answer, not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Um, but there are also times when a response is necessary. And it could be to have an open and honest conversation, or actually need to ask for help, um, or something needs to change, or boundaries need to be set in place. Or it actually can give you a space or opening to recognize that we have been demanding too much from ourselves and we need to take a break. And like I've mentioned earlier, set the boundaries. And this has become something that has, it is something that has become so much more clearer to me in the, in the last few years, actually. Um, and the other thing that also, apart from that, is sometimes people can compare or can say, yeah, being compassionate is being soft. And no, compassion does not mean you have to agree with everyone. Um, and it doesn't mean that you have to sit back and allow everything to continue as it is. Compassion requires discernment, clarity, and wisdom. So then you can ask another important question: what is the intention behind the reaction or the response? Asking questions like, are we responding because we want to defend ourselves and in turn we might end up hurting someone? Or do we want to prove that we are right? Do we want to protect ourselves from feeling uncomfortable? Are we reacting out of fear or anger or pride? Or are we just responding because something genuinely needs to be said or done? And that is where wisdom comes in. This is where discernment comes in. Of course, this does not only apply to how we treat ourselves, it is how we interact with people around us. Every person we meet, everybody's carrying difficulties. They've got their own challenges, their own fears, their hopes, struggles, um, grief, all those feelings. They're going through exactly the same thing. Um, and when one remembers this, then another question becomes helpful. Can my words and actions reduce the suffering of another instead of adding to that suffering? And again, this doesn't mean ignoring our own needs. It just creates a different place or space from where your reaction, how your reaction would be. Um, and it doesn't mean allowing people to treat us badly. Sometimes the compassionate response is just being kind, but sincerely kind, patience, just to listen, saying no, walking away, maybe take action in resolving a conflict through the right way. And yes, sometimes we won't always get it right, but you have created uh, an awareness of recognizing your reactions, becoming aware, and then you become more aware of that powerful tool of choice. You recognize that you've actually got a choice in how you speak, how you act, how you treat others, how you respond to the people around you. So this week I invite you to experiment with something, okay? So the next time you feel the urge, or the urge to react immediately, just take a moment if you can. And you don't need to suppress what you're feeling, just recognize it. Notice what is happening and just ask yourself, is a response necessary? Like I've mentioned before, and if it is, what response would create less suffering here? And then notice what happens. Um, and like I said, it happens over time. You might not always get it right, but at least you're starting to sow the seeds. You never know when the seeds will take root and start to grow and bear fruit. So, yeah, that small space between what happens And how we respond or how we react may give us an opportunity to choose more consciously and, like I said, with awareness. And perhaps this is one way that compassion can become something that we practice. Not what we only speak about or we believe in, but something that really gradually becomes part of how we see ourselves, how we meet ourselves, how our perception is being influenced, how we meet other people, situations, experiences. So, yeah, I think that's all for now. And thank you for spending this time with me. And you know what? If this reflection has been useful, please share it with someone who you may think of that can also value from this in this question. And wherever you are in this week, just go back to those questions. Is this response necessary? And if there's a reaction needed, what response would create less suffering here? So, yeah, with that, until next time, be kind to yourself, be kind to every single living being around you. May our paths be filled with compassion and light and truth and honesty. Until next time, take care. Namaste.